Terrible news here, a shocking death in the CBS News family. Veteran 60 Minutes correspondent Bob Simon was killed last evening in a car crash in New York City. His journalism career spanning half a century, covering everything from foreign wars to Hollywood, shining a spotlight on stories that were big and stories that were small. His remarkable insight earned him 25 Emmys along the way.
Vietnam is more isolated today than it was 10 or 15 years ago. Internationally, the Vietnamese were a lot more popular as victims of American aggression than as the aggressive regional power they've become.
Bob Simon died last night after the driver of his hired car lost control and crashed in Manhattan. We are now learning that he was not wearing a seatbelt. More of the details continue to come in this morning on the nature of this accident. He was clearly a giant in broadcast journalism. He was 73 years old. I'm joined now by Bernard Goldberg, who worked at CBS with Bob Simon, and he joins me on the phone. Good morning. Such a tough loss for all of the people at CBS.
It's a tough loss, not only for the people at CBS, it's a tough loss for anybody who watches television news.
Absolutely. You know, I just watched his piece last week that he did on Selma. He spoke to the director, and I talked earlier about a piece he did on Mandy Patinkin. He had such a wonderful way of asking questions, of drawing people out. He really was, you know, in my opinion, Bernie, just the best of what we all want to be in terms of how you approach this work.
Well, you know, in that sense, he was old school. Mm-hmm. He was a throwback to another era. In my view, a better era. And Martha, in a week when we're talking about a TV journalist who made things up, a TV journalist who yearned to be a celebrity, let me be very clear about this. Bob Simon only yearned to be a reporter and to cover a news story, and you know, as I say, he was a throwback, and I mean that in the absolute best sense of that word.
Yeah, I think you're so right about that. And when you look at his career, it was not about Bob Simon. It was about the stories that he did. That's
exactly the point.
And I've talked and thought a lot over the course of this week about celebrity journalism, and boy, the lessons that have been learned over the course of this week for anybody in this business who thinks that the story, you know, who thinks that the reason they're out here is because of them and because, you know, they're the star. Bob Simon is somebody who, you know, you should just sit at your desk and watch his pieces over and over and think a lot about what this profession really means.
Right. You know, he covered something like 35 stories in various kinds of war zones. He came close to, you know, being killed, frankly, in more than a few of those. And if I had gotten a call last night saying, you know, from one of my CBS colleagues saying, Bob Simon was killed in Ukraine, I would have felt just as bad. It would have been just as terrible, just as sad. But honestly, I don't know that I would have been surprised. I would have said, having covered as many stories in as many dangerous places as he had, you know, it was bound to happen. Yeah. But that it happened in a car crash in Manhattan, I can't articulate this, but in some ways this makes it worse. This makes it insane. And I know there are people out there, especially out there in the audience that I'm talking to now, that we're talking to now, who think that everything happens for a greater, you know, cosmic reason. I'm not one of those people. I don't understand this.
I agree with you. It seems like such a waste for him to lose his life in that way. And I just want to remind everybody something Rick Leventhal talked about earlier. He was taken into captivity in Iraq, and he was tortured at the beginning of the Iraq War. After that experience was over, he did not come back and do huge interviews about his experience. He went right back into the field and kept reporting that story. And it is a credit to him that that's the way that he worked. Bernie, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Okay, Martha.
Good to have you with us.
Yeah, he had a lot more stories in him, and we're poorer because we're not going to be able to see those stories.
Okay.